Welcome. This is Voices Illuminated with Judy Liman. When I write, I can shake off all my cares. My sorrow disappears. My spirits are revived. These words come from the diary of a young girl written by Anne Frank between 1942 and 1944, while she was hiding in Amsterdam during the Holocaust. Her diary is translated into more than 70 languages and has been read by generations around the world. Anne's diary is an intimate portrait of a young girl revealing her fears, her resilience, her coming of age during extreme duress. Anne Frank was murdered. She was one of 6 million Jews murdered simply because they were Jewish. 1.5 million were children. These are staggering numbers, incomprehensible. There's now a major exhibition that places visitors inside the world where Anne Frank lived and wrote her remarkable words. The exhibition was recently in New York and will soon open in Chicago. Today, my guest is Michael Glickman, advisor to Anne Frank, the exhibition. He is the founder and CEO of JMuse, an organization that works with cultural institutions and philanthropists to develop major exhibitions and public programs globally. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks for having me.
So this exhibition, I visited it while I was in New York. When I walked in, it was startling to me in a lot of ways. I want you to explain what people see and experience as they walk into the exhibition.
I'll preface this by saying the majority of people who come through the exhibition come through with some sense of understanding who Anne Frank is, or Anne Frank was. And so for us, it was really important to be able to offer the context that helped shape this 13, 14, 15-year-old girl who was in hiding and then ultimately perished at the hands of the Nazis. But to set the stage for who was the family, who were her parents, her sister, who were those around her. And so when they walked into this exhibition, they were essentially walking through Anne's words. She receives her diary on June 12th, 1942, on her 13th birthday. This is just a month before they go into hiding. And so part of this is introducing how visitors got to experience Anne's words in real time. And then they move through the beginning of the exhibition where they meet her parents, Otto and Edith Frank. It was Otto Frank and Edith Hollander. The exhibition essentially starts in 1909. There's 130 objects and artifacts that are in the exhibition, all original material that run the gamut of the experience of those who were in hiding. And we start off by showing what life was like in Frankfurt when things were actually quite good for them. And so you get an introduction to their home, what was in their home. You're seeing the oldest artifact in the exhibition, which is a bridal chest from the 1700s, which had been passed down in Otto's family from generation to generation. And then you start to move through how life starts to change for them.
Well, I have the exhibition book, and I want to show our audience, and I'm going to describe Anne Frank. She's just a beautiful young lady with brunette hair, and she's just lovely. She could be your daughter. She's just a remarkable person, inside and outside. I read the book, Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, recently, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I wanted to show, I have it earmarked here, also the diary itself. If you can describe the diary, please.
So the diary, the famous diary, is this little red checkered notebook. However, as you're moving through the exhibition, and as we understand that they were in hiding for 25 months, Anne's not just writing in that one little notebook, in that one little diary. She writes on a stack of different material. And so we see towards the very end of the exhibition, we see Miep Gies, one of the helpers who was able to find the diaries after the family was arrested and deported. She finds the stack of writings and she saves them, hoping to return them to Anne, of course, but ultimately returns them to Otto Frank.
Well, in terms of the diary itself, she she calls the diary. What does she call the diary?
Kitty.
Why?
She's writing to it in the sense of the diary is her friend. And so it gives her a chance to basically share her thoughts in a way that it's almost as if this is a living being, particularly while she's in hiding. And remember, she receives this diary for her 13th birthday. They go into hiding almost a month later. And for the next 25 months, this is what she has. It's Anne. It's her sister, Margot, her older sister. It's her parents, Otto and Edith. It's another family, the Von Pells. So you have Hermann, Augusta, and Peter. And then you have the 8th person in hiding, Fritz Pfeffer.
So you have 8 people in the annex. Before we continue, I wanted to find out, in terms of Anne's story, Anne Frank's story, why do you think it's important today?
You just reread the diary. And I think what we're finding is that it's really easy for a child or a young person to make a connection to this 13-year-old, this 14-year-old, this 15-year-old. And so there's something in this diary that just makes Anne Frank relatable to a people who don't necessarily need to come into reading the story understanding that this was a child who was murdered during the Holocaust. In fact, she's writing about all sorts of different things. And as she's writing, it may be the sort of things that my daughters or your daughters or other kids are experiencing.
You know, Anne's diary is a coming-of-age story, relationships, growing up, even first love. And that seems to resonate with young kids. You know, I'm reading, I want you to describe, I understand that Anne, in her room, had different things on her wall. And what were they? Can you describe them?
So if we back up for a moment, the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, the surviving annex itself, is one of the most visited historical sites in the world. And if we think about it in the context of one of the most visited Jewish sites in the world, it was preserved to the best of their abilities. Once they're arrested, the Nazis come in, they take out, or I should say, they are arrested when the Nazis come in and the Dutch police, and they remove the 8 people who are in hiding. A Dutch company is ordered to come in and clear out all of their possessions. This was standard practice as it related to those who were in hiding, who were found, whatever it was that they had, they were taken, and that was sent down to Nazi families in Germany. What was surviving on those walls, in particular in Anne's room, were the postcards and the cutouts of magazines and images that you can see the evolution of this child from 13, 14, 15. So her fascination with the royal family, the Dutch royal family in exile, the Princess Margaret and Princess Elizabeth, who becomes Queen Elizabeth ultimately in the UK. And then pictures of celebrities of their time. She was into fashion. She was into art. She was into architecture. It was really, this was a young lady who, as her mind evolved over time, there were things represented on those walls. Those all remain to this day in Amsterdam. They're behind glass. The exhibition itself, we did a complete meticulous rebuild of the annex. So the 5 rooms, perfect to the square inch, of people being able to move through and get a very crystal clear understanding of how these 8 people had to endure their time in hiding. In addition to that, we have furnished the space. And the space is furnished not because this is the original furniture, because all of that was taken out. But in 1961, Otto creates these scaled models. And these models are to depict, how did the family live? What was in there? How did the other family live? How did Fritz Pfeffer live? And so we know with fair amount of certainty, this was the type of furniture, this was where things were placed. In Anne's room, that space remained almost untouched. And so it's really fascinating to walk through that space, which ultimately, not that long after they go into hiding, she's sharing it with a 50-something-year-old dentist. But this is a young girl's space, and we can see how she really is moving through that period of time.
I thought that was, I have to tell you, I didn't remember any of this. I must have read this book a long time ago and I reread it. I dog-eared everything. I'm like, oh my God, she could be just like any girl today.
She was like any girl.
Yes.
And if we think about this in that particular context, you mentioned the numbers, 6 million Jews murdered, 1.5 million of them Jewish children. Anne Frank, Margot Frank, Peter von Pels, 3 of the children in this annex, in hiding, in this one space, 3 of the 1.5 million children who were murdered simply because they were Jewish. Anne and Margot and Peter, they were like every other child, and certainly they could be like our own children.
Yes, she really put a face to I was thinking about it. She just put a face to history. She has done that. It's through her actions and her writing, and I was astounded at her expansive vocabulary. Very smart young lady.
We tell the story through the lens of Anne as a young girl, a writer, as a young woman. This is a person who is moving through a really critical period of her life, and so we get this ability to see what are her hopes and dreams. We learn about, as we read the diary, and certainly as you move through the exhibition, this is a child who had ambition. This was a child who who saw a future well after they were able to come out of hiding, which of course was never the case.
This is the craziest thing. I thought it was so interesting that she brought curlers with her. I thought that was just the most adorable thing, and that she cared about how she looked. She did. She was this young girl, and she cared about fellas also, and she had her first kiss in hiding too. And just reading about that, I was just thinking about, the coming of age thing again. And also, she had squabbles with her mom. That's part of growing up. It's not every day, and you're living in such close quarters. What was their daily life like?
Think about it in the context of the factory, which was underneath, was in full use, and people were coming in and out. So that first floor of this annex, this building, this back house, the first floor was a space where workers were coming and going. And so the annex itself starts on the second floor, and it moves up to the third floor, and then you have the attic. The family couldn't be on the second floor during the day. And so during all waking hours, the Franks and the Von Pels and Fritz Pfeffer were on the third floor, really confined into a small space. And that small space for the 8 of them, essentially, during all waking hours. No shoes, no running water, no cooking food, no open windows, no listening to the radio. This was very much, it had to be, a place where much of what was going on in your day-to-day life was internalized. And so sitting and writing, sitting and reading, sitting and thinking, squabbles, you get into close quarters. You have daughters, I have daughters. We all understand, even with any children.
With anybody,
you get to a point where space becomes complicated.
Could you describe going up and how the staircases and what was behind it and how they were hidden, please?
So in Amsterdam, you would get to a bookcase on the second floor. The bookcase was open, and you would go up a flight of stairs. First floor, and then go up a flight of stairs. With the exhibition, we don't have multiple floors. So you're moving through a bookcase, you're seeing the flight of stairs. They're perfectly built, the exact number of steps, the width, the dimension, all of those, and you're going into a landing. From that landing, you're moving into the very first bedroom. It becomes the bedroom of Otto and Edith, and Margot Frank sleeps on the folding cot in the far back. The very next room is Anne's room, which she shares with Fritz Pfeffer, the dentist. Then there's the one washroom that all 8 of them have to share. The one toilet, sink, so on and so forth. You would then make your way up another set of stairs, and you would get to the third floor. And in the third floor, it was the Von Pels' bedroom, but it was also the common space. And so you had a table in there with chairs sitting around the table, or around the table for people to sit. It's where they had their meals. It's where they celebrated. It's where life became normal in the most unusual of circumstances. And I think part of this is you learn, particularly in Anne's writing and in testimony from Otto and in testimony from Miep Gies, one of the helpers, how they had to endure in that space and how things were done just to make it so that the time would pass. The very next room was Peter's room. He was the only one who had his own bedroom. And in there was a stairwell that went up to the attic. And the attic is important because, as you mentioned, Anne has her first kiss. It's where Peter and Anne go, and it's where they have their romance.
And so tell me, I know that with this also, it's probably mentioned that there was a special tree, the chestnut tree.
We don't mention that in the exhibition. But the exhibition is not a word for word sort of presentation of the book. What the exhibition does is it presents 100 years of history. So we start in 1909. We show you how Otto Frank, for instance, comes to New York. He's working and living with Nathan Strauss Jr., who's the son of the founder of Macy's department store. And we get you introduced to that. We move you through the life of the Franks in Frankfurt and then help you understand what the circumstances are, where in 1933, Otto essentially loses his banking business, and they make the decision that they're going to make their way to Amsterdam. They make their full move to Amsterdam in 33, 34. You're seeing along the way the rise of Hitler, all of the changes that are happening in Germany, and then after the Anschluss in Austria. You're then seeing what life is like in Amsterdam. And so you move into a place where you're seeing a replica of the apartment building that they live in. You're getting Anne's kindergarten class photo. So this photo, 1935, a Montessori school, 32 children. They're all 6 years old. 15 of them are Jewish. 10 of them are murdered. That photo becomes super important to be able to set the stage for what happens to these children simply because they're Jewish.
I remember that from the exhibit. What I remember is that you had the picture of the class, and then there was a dissolving of each of them.
So later on, after you've made your way through the annex and you've walked through all of these spaces, you're coming into a section on the exhibition that essentially widens the lens a bit. You're getting introduced to what is really the story of the Holocaust, not just through what did the Franks and the Von Pels and Fritz Pfeffer endure, but needed to have the ability to really set the stage and offer some context. So you're walking through and over an illuminated glass floor where you're crossing 44,000 concentration camps, 1,500 mass extermination sites, 1,000 ghettos, and other places in which Jews were held. And you're getting introduced to what life was like for the Jews of Europe. You then come back to the fate of the 8 in hiding, Otto Frank being the sole survivor, and then we introduce you to what does happen to the others. And you come back to this photograph, this kindergarten photograph. It's the very last piece of that section of the exhibition where each of the 10 names of the 10 Jewish children who were murdered are read. You're told what age they were when they were murdered, and you're told what concentration camp.
That was very haunting for me.
And then they disappear. So
Yes.
Back to your point, they disappear from this photo. You're seeing these empty gaps, and of course, you're losing a third of that classroom.
Yes, I mean, again, these are children. They had dreams, they had hopes, and Anne was one of them, and so were the other children, and they were vanishing before my eyes at the exhibition, and they were vanishing young people with dreams. I was curious about particular objects in the exhibition. I remember the Monopoly game. Can you comment on different items that are in the exhibition?
So in a section that shows sort of a full immersion of what life was like under occupation in the Netherlands, under Nazi occupation. So from May 1940 until they go into hiding in July 42, we're presenting this space. In there, and your understanding about all of the anti-Jewish regulations and laws that are taking place and being implemented literally day in, day out. Jews can't work for non-Jews. Jews can't marry non-Jews. Non-Jews can't work for Jews. They can't go to swimming pools. They can't go to parks. They can't go to ice skating rinks. They're taken out of public school, and on and on and on and on and on. And so this small group of friends that Anne is able to maintain, Jewish friends, they used to sit around and play Monopoly. And so very fortunate that one of the survivors, who was a dear friend of Anne, had donated her Monopoly game that they used to play to the Anne Frank house.
Well, it was just interesting to me. I'm like, oh, Monopoly is here. I'm like, it's a great game today also. How did Otto Frank get the diary? How did it become published?
So he's liberated on January 27th, 1945. He is the sole person to survive of the 8 that are in hiding. He's liberated from Auschwitz. He is quite ill at the time. He eventually leaves the camp in around early March of 1945, which quite frankly was fairly early compared to others in terms of being able to make their way home. And with a small group of other Dutch survivors, he makes his way across Europe. So he goes to Katowice and Czernowitz in Poland. He then makes his way down to Odessa in Ukraine, down to Istanbul in Turkey, across the entire continent to Marseille in France, and then back up to the Netherlands and Amsterdam, where he arrives on June 3rd, 1945. He reunites almost instantly with Miep and Jan Gies, 2 of the helpers. Miep was his secretary, his assistant, and really one of the driving forces of keeping those 8 alive during the period of time that they were in hiding. Each and every day, he is going to, he's posting notes, he's putting up the names. He only knows what's happened. He's learned about the fate of his wife on May 27th, And so only days before really arriving in Amsterdam does he learn that his wife had perished in Auschwitz. She had been murdered about 3 weeks before liberation. About 6 weeks after he arrives in Amsterdam, and he's been posting these notes and going to the train stations and going to the bus depots, they receive a letter. And the letter is from a nurse at Bergen-Belsen who said that Anne and Margot had died in her presence. In that very moment, Miep Gies, who had been saving these diaries, and again, I say these diaries because it wasn't just this little red checkered notebook, it was a whole stack of writings, individual pages, ledgers, so on and so forth, anything she could write in. And mind you, she was writing multiple versions. She wanted to publish her diary eventually. And so she was editing herself along the way. These diaries are taken out of, they were recovered by Miep and Jan Gies when they went back into the annex. They are held safe when it turns out that when Miep learns that Anne had been murdered, that she returns the diaries. They were in her desk drawer, and she returns them to Otto. And she returns them to Otto with the phrase, "This is the legacy of your daughter. This is your daughter's legacy." And shortly thereafter, if we think about kind of the trajectory of this, the diary is published in Dutch for the first time in 1947. It gets rejected by every American publisher. 47, 48, 49, 50, 51. It's not until, we'll make this a very Long Island thing, it's not until Doubleday Press here in, I think they were based in Garden City at the time, Doubleday Press agrees to publish the diary in English in 1952.
That's a remarkable story in itself. When kids come today to the exhibit, what do you think they are taking away now? What's interesting about that?
Again, I come back to this whole idea that you can read the diary, you can walk through this exhibition, and it doesn't matter what your background is, you can see yourself in Anne. We've all been kids. When these kids walk through, they understand what it's like to be in difficult circumstances, obviously not going into hiding, but they understand what it's been like in terms of things get difficult in some way. They can see themselves in Anne in ways that I think make it humanizes the story. It makes it possible for them to then be more it gives them a chance to question what happened in history, to ask questions. When you're seeing these children disappear from that kindergarten photograph, for instance, understanding that some of them were 14, 15, 16 years old, you're seeing these lives that were cut short. And it represents, as you have mentioned, 1.5 million Jewish children.
What about you? What did you personally, in terms of being a part of this exhibition?
I'm going to say this was probably my proudest project that I've ever worked on. I think part of this for me was the responsibility of how you bring history to life, the capacity to be able to really lean into historical artifacts and the art of storytelling and doing things in a way that really just transforms people's lives. We saw it over and over and over again. People left, moved in some cases to tears, or moved to action, or moved to thought, or moved to inquiry. All of those things become incredibly powerful. And for me, that was wonderful.
Thank you. Michael, thank you for joining us today. The spirit of Anne Frank lives on, and it lives on through her diary, and it lives on through exhibitions like this, so that we could know what the face of history truly is. This has been Voices Illuminated with Judy Liman from the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. Thank you for listening, and until next time.